Agenda item number 3 is an update on APD wellness program, and this is sponsored by Commissioner Scruggs and Weber, who aren't here today, but I know we have an update from Rick Randall, the Wellness Bureau Director at Austin Police Department.
To that last point, our patrol building at APD is shut down probably for the next 3 to 4 months, impacting 250 to 300 employees. We've kind of crushed all of them into the already crowded space we have in the main because we're having to do asbestos abatement, elevator replacement, roof repair, and plumbing work there. So you're right, the older buildings are falling apart around our folks, and so it is a wellness issue for us. So since I am Rick Randall. I'm the senior chaplain and the Wellness Bureau Director for the Austin Police Department. Since Brian Manley's been the chief of APD, employee wellness has been a high priority issue for us. I'm just going to highlight a few of the things that have happened. I was here a little over a year ago, and we were talking about a survey, and so kind of the last thing that I'll touch on is the survey, because in that time frame we got it completed. So the first thing we did was we established under his regime a wellness bureau, and what that means is we have consolidated all of our wellness resources in the department, our physician, our psychologists, our peer support team, and our chaplains under one bureau, which elevates the status and allows us to be much more strategic about our wellness efforts. Those were dispersed in different divisions of the department prior to that, and so we didn't have a coherent, cohesive approach to employee wellness, but now we do. Second thing that we did was we established resiliency training for our cadets in the first couple of weeks of their training, so that we're building in them strategies to help their career last a lifetime, teaching them how to handle stress, how to de-stress, how to address trauma in the moment. That's been well received by the cadets and pretty successful with this first class that we tried it on. Recognizing that there's a national epidemic of police suicides. Last year we had 228 suicides in the nation. That's up 56 from 2018, and Texas is the number 3 ranking state in the country for police suicides. So we just completed a training of all of our officers on able to recognize the signs of suicide and how to do interventions, so when they see that in one of their coworkers. We are very near completion of the officer phase of our eye movement desensitization and reprocessing research project, EMDR, where EMDR is being measured against more traditional strategies of stress management, more traditional methods of stress management. So we have control groups and the preliminary. We're doing this research, by the way, in conjunction with Vanderbilt University and the University of Texas LBJ School. It's a pretty unique partnership. The preliminary results are very promising. EMDR is looking like it's going to be more effective than traditional stress management forms. And what that means is we will start looking at that in a proactive way, particularly in our units like child abuse, sex crimes, homicide, where they are continually exposed to trauma. We have entered into a partnership with AFD and EMS to make a public safety wellness center to join in with the public safety wellness center that Fire and EMS had established. Long term, we are hoping that that will give us an economy of scale, that we, in treating our employees, we'll be able to see are there common issues that are impacting our public safety employees across the board and act accordingly. So our physicians are collaborating, our psychologists, our peer support teams will enable us to be way more strategic in taking care of our employees, I think. And then to our survey, and I'm just going to hit a few highlights of the survey. I've given you all copies that you can look at it at your leisure. First of all, we had like a 57% response rate on the survey, which blows the national average out of the water. I think 19% is normal. So we were very pleased with the responses, and we believe that that response of that degree communicates some validity to the data that we can make some reliable conclusions and decisions on. Our officers in the research indicated, in the survey indicated they were using the safety equipment that we provide for them to a high rate, so ballistic vests and seat belts. That's really important because the second major cause of fatalities among officers, line of duty deaths, is caused by traffic accidents. And a high percentage of those, believe it or not, are because people aren't wearing seat belts in their cars. So they indicated they're using the tools that we gave them to a very high degree, and we're grateful for that. They indicated that they don't even in spite of kind of what the narrative nationally be, that our officers indicated by a wide majority that they did not think that police officers need to be distrustful of community members because of that lack of understanding. Most of our officers said that they believe that police officers should not only gather information from victims of crime, but they should comfort victims of crime, which was a pretty gratifying statistic for us. A large majority said that they believe that policing is an honorable profession in which they still take great pride. And a great majority felt that the training that they had received in things like de-escalation, shoot, don't shoot scenarios, mental health issues, use of non-lethal methods, and fair and unbiased policing had sufficiently prepared them to do the job. So they were commenting on the effectiveness of the training in light of their daily jobs. Now, those are the positive, some of the positive highlights. On maybe the not so positive highlights, this won't come as a surprise to many people. So while most of our officers said they felt their immediate supervisor was fair and they trusted them, the further up the chain that you go, the further away from that frontline supervisor, the less trust there was, the less sense of connection. Many of them felt that the upper levels of the chain made decisions without adequately consulting with the people whom those decisions would impact. Most felt that there was a lack of public understanding for what it means to be a police officer. And my last 2 points are more to individual officer wellness issues. That a big percentage of our officers had reported sleep deprivation issues, and a significant amount of them reported that at times they struggle with alcohol abuse, not addiction, but abuse, overuse. And that's significant because, as I said to the group back a little over a year ago, public safety workers are 300% more likely to abuse alcohol than the general population. And as far as sleep deprivation, firefighters have 100% sleep deprivation. I don't know how you sleep in a fire station. But so we know that there's a direct connection between not getting enough sleep and other significant health issues like diabetes, et cetera. And public safety workers are number one of all professions for heart disease, hypertension, diabetes. So we weren't surprised by any of these results, but now we have our wellness task force teams prioritizing what are the efforts that we want to engage in that will address some of these issues.
Great, thank you for that overview. We have some questions here.
I think you knew that these were going to come from me. So I'm really appreciative that you guys are taking some steps to look into how your officers are feeling and how your employees are feeling about their work. There are many components to wellness in any kind of organization, and there are some that I feel are not really being addressed here that I would encourage all three agencies. And I'm also hopeful that we can hear more from our other two public safety agencies on the wellness of their employees as well, and the steps that they're taking to take care of their employees also. But things that I really encourage you, and I think we need to be keeping an eye on financial wellness, particularly But there's a lot of things going on with people that are at that kind of pay rate in society in general. And then looking at the number of officers who have higher education and knowing that there's a potential that they have taken on student loans, and so all of that feeding back into this, and that we're providing resources for our officers to maintain financial wellness, because we all know that's one of the biggest stressors that a person can have. As well as civilian employees, looking at personal wellness. I'd also be interested in hearing more. There's some questions in here. I've been spending most of the time before the meeting, as soon as we got this, up to now, perusing what you provided us in the data. But officer morale, there's a couple of things that touch on it, but I'd like to see a little bit more. That raises a question of when was this survey administered and how much has the information we have here changed given recent events with APD and the leadership in APD. Looking at physical wellness, so are officers getting access to physical exercise, opportunities like that? Do they feel like they have enough time to engage in those kinds of activities? Because a lot of your officers, and again, this goes for all three of our agencies, you're spending a lot of time in vehicles, riding around, sitting down, and you're not up on your feet, moving. And so that looking at the impact of the gear that you're carrying and the toll that takes on the body and the way that you're carrying the gear. And, we know that you can have back problems, all of that. And so making sure we're looking at that, really digging more into the emotional wellness and even, potentially, and I'm using this term broadly, but spiritual wellness. I've had conversations with officers about those kinds of issues as well. And I know that you do a pretty darn good job on the spiritual wellness part for as many officers as you can, but you're one man and you've got a lot of officers to help. So those are some things that I just want to highlight that I don't see as much in here that I wish we were looking at more. Another thing is we're talking about officer safety in your survey, but have you done anything with civilian employees? And we know that civilian employees in the police department actually take on a lot of stress and a lot of there's a lot of wellness concerns for them as well. I'd be interested in seeing how they're faring, and they're the ones that in all of our agencies we sometimes forget they're there, but they're important as well. They provide a lot of support and a lot of critical services in the agencies. So I'd like to hear more about what you're doing for civilian populations and your employees.
So we do have a corresponding survey on the civilian employees, and I'll be happy to supply it to the commission.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
One of the criteria when we were creating the Wellness Bureau was a lot of the conversation was about officer wellness, and we redirected that and said this is about employee wellness. Of course, the largest block of our civilian employees in the police department are our call takers and dispatchers, who now have been given first responder status because of the trauma that they go through all the time. So our eyes are very much on that. And as I said, I'll be happy to share the survey results from the
that would be fantastic. Then you've talked a little bit about some programs that you're implementing. What steps are you taking to evaluate those and make? You've talked about the fantastic work you're doing. Sounds like some experimental work even, which is really exciting. Some great evidence-based work on the EMDR study. But what steps are you taking to evaluate some of the other wellness programs that you're implementing to make sure they're efficacious?
So probably our first tool in the toolbox with regard to that is, as we've made these programs more accessible to the workforce, are we seeing an increase in people that are taking advantage of them? And the numbers are almost staggering. It's exponential. We have this past year gotten 10 people into full inpatient treatment programs, which is huge. I mean, we're talking about saving lives there. That would be unheard of 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. But particularly our peer support team is so embedded in the department that they are making resources available to people, and folks are responding to that. We are looking for other, we're working with Measure Austin and others to try to create some real metrics that we can show effectiveness. Having Chris Vallejo as a commander in our department, we're going to be data driven. So finding ways to make that to make that applicable here that's a high priority to us. We can't just anecdotally refer to this. We need to be able to show the data.
Has his promotion to commander impacted the ability to include him in? Because I know from what I understand, he has different responsibilities now. Is that impacting his ability to really inform and participate and help with the evidence-based work?
Respectfully, I would think nothing short of death would impact Chris being able to be involved in data collecting. And
Awesome.
He is actually, our database or data-driven policing expert in the department. So he's still in that fellowship. So he's still very much involved with that.
So a couple more questions. I'm sorry, but I'm going to kind of dig into some of this data a little bit. But you mentioned, high use of seatbelts and such. How much of that have you guys discussed could be social desirability responses, where they're like, okay, we're going to answer yes because we should be using them, but perhaps they're not really? Do you have any feelings on that, either of you?
Maybe a little hard to judge as far as the seatbelts are concerned, but it's easy to tell if people are using their vests or not.
For sure. Yeah.
And so that's something that that supervisors are checking for.
Oh, good.
At
Okay.
show-ups.
And do you have policy that mandates the wearing of the vests? Okay, good. All right. All right. And then for both your officers and your civilians, are you using debrief procedures following critical or traumatic incidents, anything like that? What kinds of programs do you have in place to address traumatic, extreme incidents? We had the stabbing last week that was pretty traumatic for the officers involved, I would venture to guess. And so what are we doing for, and we've had several SWAT call-outs recently. What are we doing for the officers and the civilian employees involved in
So
all
I'll
that?
tell you the good, and then I'll tell you the bad.
Okay.
The good is, yes, we do have very strong debriefing procedures in place, and using the example you gave, that incident happened on Friday. By Saturday morning, the officer that had been the first to respond was already meeting with our staff psychologist to do a one-on-one to make sure that it's not a fit-for-duty evaluation. It's a check-in to make sure that he feels comfortable.
And you guys clearly convey to the officers that this isn't a we're going to try to pull you off the streets evaluation. It's a we're making sure you're okay.
Right. And to maintain the integrity of that statement, our in-house psychological resources are not used for fit-for-duty evaluations. Those are farmed out. In 22 years I've been associated with APD, we've not done a mental wellness fit-for-duty evaluation. So it hasn't happened. We this morning had the debrief of the unit, so that all the officers that responded got to come in and talk about their process with our peer support team, victim services, and one of our staff psychologists.
Fantastic.
The bad is that the definition of a critical incident is not scientific.
Sure.
Something that I think is just normal, you may say that's traumatizing. So I do believe that particularly that for some of our units, and SWAT might be an example, that they would maybe err on the side of being over-conservative in how they would define a critical incident, whereas other units, I think we're seeing more, we're getting more requests from units to say, hey, can you come do a debrief for us when it's not an officer-involved shooting. That used to be all we did debriefs for, but now we're doing them for child deaths, situations like happened on Friday.
And I don't see any questions in here about cumulative stress and trauma. So, you can have one major traumatic event and that can have the same impact, or you can have a worse impact from an accumulation of smaller traumas and smaller stresses, things that for most police officers would be run-of-the-mill ordinary things for them, but an accumulation of those kinds of events over time can result in a similar traumatic impact that perhaps we don't pay as much attention to.
Right, and that's where our EMDR research has really helped us, because to do that research, you have to list a number of traumatic events that you've had professionally. So we're seeing 10, 11, 12 things happening over the course of a 15, 20-year career, and that's showing us the cumulative impact.
Okay. And do you have any training for supervisors in recognizing employees who might be suffering from the cumulative impacts of stress?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
We just recently went through the training of all of our officers, where we laid out the warning signs for someone who's experiencing trauma in their life. And we, in our new supervisors school, we feature kind of a front line. Here's a list of things that when you see these things happening, it's not like any one of these would trigger a response from you, but you see a number of them, it means you better pay more attention, pay closer attention to what's going on in this person's life.
So you're paying attention to early intervention opportunities?
Correct.
Great.
And we're in the midst of redoing our GAP early warning system. We're redoing that, increasing the number of things that we look at. So.
Okay. Cool. So I'm going to refer now to a few things on this that caught my attention. So on the first page of data in the report that you provided us, it has this question about increased scrutiny and attention from media and public protests has increased your concern for your safety, so there's some concerning things that I see here, making them more concerned about safety than in the past, resulting in general population treating with less respect, make you less willing to stop and question those engaging in suspicious behavior. So this looks to me like there's some cynicism coming into the organization. Not that there isn't ordinarily a lot of cynicism in a police department or any public safety agency anyway, but what steps are you guys taking to address your findings from this with respect to cynicism, concern for safety, willingness to engage with the general population, and the ability to build trust and community, which you really rely on to do your jobs? So
the data on that first page balanced out by the statements of, we believe that we agree that police officers should be about not just gathering data from victims, but about comforting victims.
Sure.
And we don't believe that we should necessarily distrust community members more. What we did, we have conflicting data points there.
Right.
And
which is concerning. Yeah. From a data perspective.
It's certainly alerting, right? I guess I would use a different term, but even teasing out the data, as you can see, there was significant greater concern for their safety. But when you talk about less willing to stop and search or stop people doing that, those numbers started coming down. So we're not necessarily seeing a depolicing effect.
Okay.
But I think these are fair assessments that they're aware of the culture that we live in.
Sure.
It is a more dangerous. We have more police officers being killed in the line of duty. So it is a fair representation of the situation.
Yeah. And then on page 8, you brought up the poor sleep quality. I'm also looking at, these numbers are actually kind of high for sleep disorders. Also, the concerned about are symptoms of mental health issues, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and concerns about heart conditions, disease. We know that officers are at increased risk for all of these, so are you guys implementing programming to address those?
Great question. The answer is yes. So in addition to just our encouragement for people to get an annual physical checkup and to look for these specific things, we've been working with corporate HR in the Healthy Connections program, so that if people will go, and there's a specific blood test called the Cleveland Clinic test for lipids that's predictive for heart disease, and we've been partnering up with the cardiologist, Dr. John Scheinberg, in doing those assessments. That now is a test that the employee gets reimbursed if they get done
Cool.
through healthy connections.
Great. Then you alluded to this a little bit, but there's several questions kind of peppered throughout here about trust of supervisors and then trust of, for lack of a better term, administration. I'll use that to kind of differentiate between your direct line supervisor and then the fifth floor group. But that's, I know that this survey clearly was done before all of the recent events have come out with APD, with all of the different concerns that we're having. So I would imagine these numbers are going to get worse if we were to resurvey right now. What's being done to address that from a wellness perspective?
The disconnect from
yes.
So
exactly.
Just there's a variety of things. One of the things is one of our assistant chiefs rides out every weekend with patrol shifts, and so
you mean only one of the assistant chiefs, or all of the assistant chiefs, one of them each weekend?
One of them each weekend.
Okay,
yeah.
just clarifying.
Thank you. Yeah. So in fact, I think you're out this weekend, aren't you? And what we've seen is it becomes a two-way street. Number one is the frontline officers get to see the executive staff, and number two, the executive staff opens themselves up to ideas, complaints, etc.
Okay.
I do want to caveat, though, to say Hans Toch wrote a book called Stress and Policing back in 2000. I think the last edition was 2002. And if you look at the conclusions that his research made, they're like no different than this.
Oh yeah, it's consistent.
Yeah.
I'm well aware of the research.
I draw a distinction between what's specific to APD and what seems to be kind of industrial.
But do you want to be like all of the other agencies, or do you want to do better?
I want to do better.
We want our city to, be the best in what we do, right?
So we know that there are things that need to be done that involve the rank and file more, that help them feel like they have more input into decisions that are being made. We have instituted a policy board that's comprised of people that are impacted by policy, who vet policy before it gets changed. So it's kind of little tweaks like that we hope will.
Okay. And then
I'm not Pollyannish about it, right?
Sure. I've never known you to be Pollyannish about anything. And then I could probably go on for 2 hours about this because there's so much data in here, and I'm a data nerd. But I will. The last thing that I'd really like to explore: what are you guys doing to look into and better understand officer morale right now, given kind of the turmoil in the department, both internally in response to the external kind of, I guess I'll use the word scrutiny is a good word for it.
So
what are you guys doing to keep a finger on the pulse of that and make sure that this isn't having a detrimental impact on your ability to recruit, maintain, sustain, and have healthy officers and civilian employees?
Interestingly enough, this survey was done in the middle of no contract.
Right. Yeah.
So morale was pretty low during that time. I don't want to say we're going to have the same things a year or 2 or 3 years from now that we have right now, the identical circumstances, but in policing, everybody likes firefighters. In policing, you're always one bad decision or one crisis call away from people not liking you very much. So I think we have to find ways to remind ourselves of what the reason is we came into this profession in the first place. And so when I see a majority of them saying, I still take great pride in my profession, that's a hopeful sign for me. It's like, okay, it's not going to be that hard to keep the main thing, and realize that everybody's not going to love you. And so that's an officer morale issue, to keep getting that message out. Another officer morale issue is we just changed the policy where our male officers can grow beards.
Oh, I know. I saw that. That's fantastic.
And that may not seem like much, but I think for those.
I think they're going to look more like the average Austinite, though.
Well, and
Hey, right here.
yeah, and it hopefully will help them make an easier on ramp for relations with the community. But doing things like that, giving wins where we can, things that benefit the men and women of the police department, that's a way to improve morale.
Sure. Well, and I know that one of the biggest wins that I've seen with departments I've consulted with in the past has been the ability to wear the load-bearing vests. Have you guys explored that at all?
Yes. And
Okay.
do you want to speak to that, Chief?
Is it? Oh, that's so good.
We've had load-bearing vests for the last year.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
you could get a doctor's note,
Okay.
describing a back issue, and those.
So you're not doing preventive yet?
But it's been recently approved that there's a certain carrier that we've
Okay.
gone to, and we are doing a one-time purchase to where everybody on patrol gets that, and have approved all of the different carriers.
Okay.
And so whether it's a beard or a vest, it's certainly helpful and encourages smiles, which we all need more officers smiling.
Right? We need more people smiling.
Yes.
And that's all I have for you. Thank you, Chaplain, for coming today. I appreciate
Sure.
that.
Commissioner Tyree?
I'll try to make it short. Page 13 and 15. What I see is the officers really love their profession. They're not interested in looking somewhere else for a job. But they think the promotion process sucks.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty clear, and I don't understand those two necessarily being compatible. I love my profession, but I don't know how I get a, well, actually, one of them over here says I know exactly how I get a promotion, but over here it says it's not based on merit.
Right.
That concerns me.
Right.
Okay. But what I think, and you pointed it out, bottom of 13, they love their profession. Mhm. And I'm not looking elsewhere for a job.
So I think you would find in that promotion process that many officers have concerns about the assessment center
Okay.
for promotion above, for sergeant and above. Some have concern that their annual performance reviews, SSPRs, don't count for anything in the. But at the same time, we all recognize that there's a subjectiveness to those that unless we can find a way to take that out, then those wouldn't be very fair. We'd be tilting the scale the other way. So I think that's more disgruntlement with the process itself.
Yeah. So what are you doing to address it?
Well, we're trying to make
those are big numbers.
box. This is where my backup comes in.
Hey, if you got to have backup, this is the guy, right?
Right.
Hello, I'm Ken Cassidy, President of the Austin Police Association. We tried to change it in the last bargaining. You know, there were so many different issues. We did a lot of research on promotions, and we provided a different option, and the city refused to cooperate with our ideas. They believe that the system that they have now is easily defensible in court. They claim that it is more fair for minority representation and to have an equal playing field. A majority of our minority officers don't feel that way. We've tried to change it the last two bargaining processes, and we've been told no, and I think it really comes down to they think the process that they have now is the most easy to defend in court, and I think that's kind of where we're stuck. And that's been an issue that's come up over the last couple of months with the issues that have come up with accusations of mistreatment towards minority officers. I think that and the transfer process are things that need to be looked at, and that will be a major issue in the next bargaining in the next 2 years. Hopefully we can get it worked out before then, but I don't think that's likely.
I can also mention that working with a group of officers that are committed to changing the promotional process, and I think we realize within our ranks that if you want to promote, it's just a matter of taking a 100-question test. And so I honestly can look at many officers and say the only difference between me and you, other than years of experience, are 400-question tests. And that's a problem. Our police department, much like the American education system, is creating good test takers, not pathfinders, not leaders. And that's something we have officers that are committed to work towards a valid solution, because we all don't think it's fair for somebody to be under a disciplinary suspension and be allowed to study for the next test. And there's many other things that go along with merit. What are your area of responsibility? Have you actually been a leader? Have you been supervising? Do you have the character traits needed to be a leader? And we should be hiring those traits right from the get-go into our academy, not just those that meet minimum standards. So I've been working with a group of officers of different ranks that are committed to changing that and working towards that before the next contract comes up for vote.
And from my perspective, you just said a key word that I have not heard enough from your agency recently, and that's leaders. And I'd like to see more leadership and less management, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And I think that would be phenomenal for our community as well if we saw more leadership happening and less, management, which there's a clear difference between the two.
Yes, so for the last 2 years, we've been teaching servant leadership to brand new supervisors, and then over the last year, we've opened that up to not only our supervisory positions, but also anybody that wanted to come. And so the goal was that to get the message that leadership is a choice and it's not a rank. And it would be my goal that anybody that comes to our organization with a command and control mindset struggle from day one, and that it's much easier to serve, much easier to be a servant leader in our organization and to care for others and put yourself second behind those that you're responsible for. And so I'm a firm believer that leadership is not about being in charge, it's about taking care of those in your charge. And so that's been the consistent message that we've been putting out as much as possible in the last year and a half.
And I think that's a lesson and a perspective that would serve all officers and all employees in the agency well, to have that kind of mindset, because ideally our perfect utopian police department, they would all be leaders in the community.
Yes.
I have a couple of quick questions. So just to clarify, is participation in this wellness program voluntary for the employees?
If you want to access the resources of the wellness program, we have an employee assistance program, we have our in-house resources, and then we have referrals outside the department. So yes, it's absolutely volitional, and we don't force people into any one track. We try to match them up with what we think will be the most effective for them, but at the end of the day, it's their decision.
Okay. Yeah, and the reason I asked that is because I know, nationally, there's no protections for people, around health privacy. There's very little. So if people are doing wellness programs through their employer, there's nothing stopping their employer or these health insurance companies from selling their data. So I think, that's just something that's important to note in terms of wanting to help people and not subjecting them to any kind of data sharing that they don't consent to. So thank you for clarifying. Also just noted, on page 13 that there's pretty split, between employees are treated the same regardless of their gender. That's something to work on, obviously. And I also think kind of related to that on page 15, this lack of confidence, in diversity and inclusion efforts, within the department. So I think, again, just showing there that there's certain employees who do not feel like they're getting ahead within the department because of their gender or their race and ethnicity. So obviously that's something that I think is something that we need to continue to work on. And then, just in terms of culture, I know we've brought up issues with, change at APD and how difficult that's been, to get, policy changes. And I think, obviously, the majority said they strongly agree that it's really not possible to change things around here. So it seems like there's a lot of skepticism within that question. And another thing that I wasn't sure about based on the questions is if the survey had anything about at-home relationships or family relationships or partner relationships that might impact, how they operate on the job. Just knowing that there's been news of, certain officers who have had violent situations with their partners, and we certainly don't want any kinds of behaviors, that might happen in the home to actually then kind of carry over to the public. So are there any things in place, any measures in terms of spotting red flags with people who might be violent or have anger management issues that need to be quickly addressed?
So I would speak to the anger issue, that there are three primary emotional expressions related to stress and trauma: depression, anxiety, and anger. Anger is, in public safety, the more acceptable expression than would be depression or anxiety. Does that make sense? It's like if I come to work and I say to Box, "Hey man, I'm really depressed today," Box is probably going to tell me, "I love you, bud, but you need to go home. I'm not sure I want you as my backup the rest of the evening." Same if I tell him I'm anxious. If I tell him, "Box, I'm just pissed off at the world today," he's probably going to say, "Get in line," so is everybody else, right? So anger is a really clear indicator in these professions that something else is going on. So for us, yeah, that's absolutely if a supervisor sees that, or a peer sees that. You see guys like going off on, like going on a rant and show up or something. You need to let us know so that we can pull that person aside and say, something going on. Is there anything going on in your life? I do want to stress that if there's a domestic issue outside of work that finds its way into the workplace, either because of the significant other or someone makes a complaint, that has immediate career implications for that employee. That person's not working for a while.
Another good thing that you need to know is that a lot of the referrals, and I correct me if I'm wrong, but most of them are shift mates coming to Tim Cresta and his team, and they say, "Hey, I really have, Danielle is really having a hard time," or "Danielle is getting blasted every night when they get off work, and they're coming to work intoxicated," or whatever it might be. But it's not citizen driven; it's mostly officer driven and your shift mate driven. So that's something that we're proud of.
Okay, thank you. Follow-up question?
So given some of the commentary in here about the distrust of again, I'll just use the term administration, the higher-ups, as well as some of I was just looking again, some of this on not feeling that it's a fair disciplinary process. And have you guys looked at, and then then there's some other pieces in here that reflect that they don't feel like they are informed about, the officers are informed about decision making, they don't know why decisions are being made, how they're being made, those kinds of things. Are you guys looking at ways, and I'll kind of direct this to both of you, to increase and enhance communication and make sure that the officers are aware of decision making, what decisions are being made, when they're being made, why they're being made? Because we know that when we are an organization that is going through a lot of change, that we really do need to make sure that we understand why, as members of the organization, if we are going to actually implement the change.
I think that's always going to be a challenge, and that's part of leadership is communication, and to make sure that, I visited with 4 different show-ups today in the afternoon, and so it just being available and letting them know that here I am to answer questions. What questions do you have? Because we're going to have rumors. We're going to have issues with morale. I can tell you the officers that I spoke to today are more concerned about our vacancies and getting officers trained and on the streets, and they're concerned about cars. They're not as concerned about beards or load-bearing vests or the independent investigation that's going on within our higher ranks right now. They just want to go out there. They want to serve. The same reason I signed up for 25 years ago is there is a box, a machine inside a car that tells the officer where every single person is in the city that needs help. And there are some officers like myself that would just rather go help than to eat or take a break. And that's the vast majority of the officers I talk to. They're not concerned about the discipline. They've never been in trouble. They've never been to internal affairs. So the perception is what they hear and what they may believe. And so we're certainly subject to that uneducated or uninformed opinions when it comes to surveys. But all I can say is we have to be as transparent and answer the questions, and communication is key. And I just know that we've got a lot of leaders that are trying to do that every day, and we could always improve. And every time there's discipline that's handed down, it's important for us to get out there as leaders to communicate and answer any and all questions, because a lot of times the suspension memo is very short and leaves people with more questions than they have answers. And then on top of that, if there's a news article that comes out, then the rumors go in a different way sometimes.
Well, and then you add on top of that sometimes you guys have the do not discuss policies that go into place, which can further isolate the person or further contribute to the rumors and the distrust building. So.
Right, and there's an isolation that happens with the do not discuss, and especially if there's an officer that's sent home to spend their time at home while the investigation's going on. It's very important for us to be mindful of that and let them know that they're still employees. We still care about them. They still have people that they can call. We can't discuss the case specifically, but we can talk about everything else and any of the other issues that they may have that we can help with. And so some of those officers that have been sitting at home, who have felt that isolation, have had anxiety and depression and all of the things we've discussed here, and it's important that we help them, because when they start telling their friends or their shift mates that I'm just sitting at home and nobody's called me, that's certainly not a good message.
Okay, well, we really appreciate this conversation. Thank you, Mr. Randall, for coming today and presenting. And we look forward to hearing more about it as it develops. Thank you. So item number 4, update on gun violence task force. We don't have Commissioner Scruggs here to present on that, so we'll have to table that for another meeting.